Yes. Recorded vote is requested. Further consideration, the amendment will be suspended. It's now in order to consider log number 928 by Mr. Green. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, amendment number 928, and I ask for its consideration at this time.
Will the clerk please distribute the amendment? Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The chair recognizes the gentleman for the purpose of explaining his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, our military service academies exist to train men and women to lead service members as cohesive teams to kill our nation's enemies in combat. To do that, we train them to create a command climate in which each soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine and Coast Guardian has the back of the member to their left and right. Imagine how our military units are going to build unit cohesion when our military academies are teaching a theory that because a person has a certain skin color, that person is automatically assumed to be a racist. How do you build team atmosphere in warriors if you're teaching them that the person next to them is a racist? We also teach our officers to obey and defend the laws of the land. Discrimination is against the law. Critical race theory is an ideology that divides and insists that people are racist because they're a particular race, and that discrimination is the way you solve past racism and discrimination. Essentially, teaching that breaking the law is how we fix the mistakes of the past. Our nation has clearly made mistakes. I shared a few moments ago. We should teach our history. There are many different curriculums out there to do that, and to suggest that critical race theory is the only way that it can be done is, well, not intellectually honest. But to teach that discrimination is justifiable repeats some of the very mistakes that we've made in the past. And just so you know, I've had many African Americans reach out to my office. They have spoken out against critical race theory. They want the truth too, they just don't want the division. And they too see CRT as a division. Critical race theory should not be taught in our military academies. It's divisive, it destroys unit cohesion, and it encourages breaking the law to solve past wrongs. This amendment simply says that it can't, and it defines those things that we all would agree shouldn't be taught. In the bill, simply says those things can't be taught at our nation's service academies. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
This is essentially the same debate that we just had, and we will have a couple more times. I think that the one key thing from what the gentleman said is, we are not suggesting, the military is not suggesting that critical race theory is the way to address racism. And that is the false issue that I think Mr. Horsford was alluding to being brought up here, that this is being, spread out throughout the military and, as has been suggested, is being indoctrinated. That is simply not the case. The military, no place, is telling people this is the right, the truth, this is what you must believe, you have to do that. That is simply not happening, which again is why Mr. Horsford, brings up his point of what is this really about? Also, the way a lot of these amendments are worded, it's a pretty broad definition. This will, without a shadow of a doubt, discourage people in the military from attempting to address issues of diversity and racism. No doubt about it. This will have a chilling effect on that. And for what? To stop the military from indoctrinating people in something that they're not indoctrinating people in. So that's why bringing up this issue is both harmful and pointless at the same time. Pointless in terms of accomplishing anything positive, and harmful in getting at what Mr. Fallon and Mr. Green in particular have very heartfelt articulated the need to deal with. These amendments are not helping in that regard, because that's not what is going on. Now, as it happens, CRT is one thing that's out there. So, and again, as Chairman Milley, and I have the quote here, I don't know if it's worth reading, pointed out, just because you teach what communism believes doesn't mean that you're a communist. That's exactly what he said. And I have not actually been to a military school, but I know at the War College and others, they frequently have taught what Mao is talking about, what Marx is talking about. As it happens, I studied a lot of that in college. Wasn't a communist then, not a communist now. So that's that point. So we are raising an issue that is not happening in a way that will undermine. All these amendments are about, if you start talking about this stuff, we are going to be all over you. Number one, restricting what you can do with it. And number two, requiring you, as the one amendment that was put forward, the paperwork equivalent of an act of God to try to establish what you're doing, so don't you dare go there. That is the overall effect of all of these amendments, is to block the effort to do what you all claim, not all, sorry, a couple of you, have claimed that you really want to do. So that's the concern about the amendment. All right. Further debate. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Sorry, I can't.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Respectfully, I disagree. I've spoken with a number of service members, Navy personnel, also Army, who have told me exactly what they're being taught, and what you've characterized is not accurate. It's a loaded agenda. There are slide decks that basically, at the very beginning, white participants are told that you have inherent bias. You don't know you've got it, and there's nothing you can do about it, and it's dangerous. And it honestly, it pains my heart. I was proud of the service that I gave for 26 years. The military isn't perfect, but I always found it to be a better organization than the outside society. And I remember on my first deployment on the Forrestal, I had a black senior chief petty officer. We were down on the mess decks one night, and he said, Lieutenant, back when I first came in, as my first cruise as a sailor, you couldn't have been down here on these mess decks. We used to have race riots down here on the decks. Isn't it amazing how things have changed over the 25 years since I came in? Later on in the early 90s, I had a black buddy of mine that I flew with. We would always get in vigorous debates on a number of issues, and I remember a new book had come out from Dinesh D'Souza about race, and we got in some really interesting conversations about it. And he said, what I find amazing is the dichotomy in my life that I face between when I'm wearing my uniform and when I go home and take that off. And he said, you don't see it because we work together here day by day, but you should come follow me around the Orange Park Mall on a Saturday when I'm in civilian clothes. And he said, here is a lieutenant in the Navy in uniform. I am treated with respect and dignity. I don't get that on the outside. Right. And I fear that we are really destroying a lot of good that I think the best institution in this country has fought to garner over decades. And we're not perfect, but we're a hell of a lot better than we used to be, and we're in danger of losing all the progress we've made over these decades by pushing this narrative that our military is no different than the rest of society out there and that everybody in uniform is a racist. I just won't stand for it. I support both of these amendments. Now yield back.
Who seeks recognition? Mr. Brown.
Thank you. So the concern that I have with these amendments is if you take out the term critical race theory and you focus on some of the things that you say we want to eliminate, I'd agree with that. I mean, who wants to introduce or teach things that create division? Who wants to instill racism within a student population at our service academies? The problem is that you're mischaracterizing critical race theory. Now, I won't argue with the examples that you might use about this author said this and he's a critical race theorist or someone else, but just like other theories, there are some people that are extreme one way or the other. Critical race theory started at Harvard Law School in the 1970s. I went to Harvard Law School. It was critical legal studies. And as I said in one of the other debates, it is a framework that, whether you agree with it or not, but it is a theory that explains how race and the legal system has resulted in some of the conditions that exist today. For example, Constitution, measure me as 3/5 as a human. Okay, there were Supreme Court cases that said I was property. Okay, at the end of slavery and when Reconstruction was over, the legal system, and whether you agree with it or not, this is the theory, the legal system began over-incarcerating black men. Okay, so a critical legal theorist might say, Today, the mass incarceration of blacks is a residual legacy effect of that. You may agree with it or not. It's trying to explain current day mass incarceration. Today, African Americans' net worth, our wealth, is considerably lower than a white family. A critical legal theorist might say, hey, listen, here's an explanation using legal framework. Okay, there was a time in this country, it happens to a lesser extent today, when there was serious redlining, banks redlined black families out of neighborhoods. They couldn't buy a home, so they rented in dilapidated neighborhoods. So that has a legacy, a residual effect that plays out today in this disparity in wealth. So whether you agree with the theory or not, critical race theory, based on critical legal studies, is an effort to look at the legal system, the laws, the statutes, the practices and customs in the economy, in society, in government, to explain race relations and why we see some of the conditions we have today. That's critical race theory. Some people may take it to extreme, I don't know, and say that America is a racist nation, or they may say it's based on hate. I'm not gonna take issue with who said what, but that's not critical race theory. I studied critical legal studies at Harvard. That's the basis for critical race theory. In none of the classes I sat in did I hear some of the things that are, proposed findings in these amendments. So if you had an amendment that said, let's go after the bad, that's fine. But you're going after something that just in and of itself is not the problem that you think it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have to update some of my own legal studies from law school, and perhaps my friend from Maryland would do the same, because while it's true the critical race theory emerges from critical legal studies, the initial frame said that we have to view all things in the law through the lens of race first. That is a very different thing than saying that you have to evaluate all aspects of society through race first. And I'm not hand-selecting critical race theorist authors. These are the founding fathers and mothers of critical race theory. Don't take my word for it, the gentlelady from California said it was Ibram Kendi's How to Be Anti-Racist that informs her perspective on critical race theory. And Kendi says capitalism is racist and racism is capitalist. Those are not values that we want instilled in our military. I want to address the point the chairman made about, well, we can learn about communism and we don't all become communists. Communism is not an immutable trait. You can sit before a group of students at West Point and lay out a political theory, and then that person can choose to reject or accept the political theory or analyze its frailties or benefits. But when you tell people that you are frail and you are privileged and you are racist because you're white, there is no way to divorce yourself from that in an educational setting. There is no way to have that not affect you. And it is, in fact, the critical race theorists who say that Dr. King was wrong. And I think it's okay for the Armed Services Committee to say, Dr. King was right. We've had enough of a perspective on history of that. And so the other argument we heard is that, well, why do we have to bring this up as an issue? We did not pick this fight. We don't want this fight. We'd rather be talking to you about something else. We have to raise the issue, my colleague, because when we ask questions...
was suspended. Just a second. Can't have heckling. It's his time. We'll give everybody else their time when it comes. Mr. Gates.
My initial question to Lloyd Austin was, how should we think about critical race theory? That was the question, with no prejudice, with no editorializing, with no hyperbole. And his answer was, we don't do it. And then, lo and behold, it turns out they do it. And they're having professors tell students what whiteness is who believe that whiteness is wrong. And no one is wrong because they're white. And no one's wrong because they're black or any other color in this country. And that is what we have to firmly reject. The chairman said that critical race theory, the chairman said that this debate, that bringing these amendments, was both harmful and pointless. Harmful and pointless is how we think about critical race theory, and it's why this endeavor to extract it from our military and from our country is worth the time we are spending on it. I yield back.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure what the full grievance is that the prior speaker talked about, but I just want to be absolutely clear that these amendments are doing nothing but peddling made-up attacks to try to divide us. That is what this is about. You're not focused on crushing the pandemic, focusing our economy, making sure our children are safe to go back to school, supporting our troops. You spent more than an hour trying to create an issue to divide us. So while you focus on dividing us, the rest of us will deliver for the American people.
Mr. Chairman?
All right, if we could, I know there's a lot of people who want to speak about this. This is one of those issues that we could talk about for days, literally. I think everyone's made their points. Everyone's had a fair shot. We'll go a little while longer here. But if you could be judicious at this point, it would be in the best interest of this committee's work and what we're trying to do here. Not silence and debate. We've had a big, robust debate. But we do have other things to talk about, and we have to get through this. So we'll do a couple more. We got a couple more of these amendments coming. So let's try to wrap this up relatively expeditiously. All right.
I completely agree with the chairman.
Who wants recognition?
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Waltz, I think, did want recognition, and I'm sorry. Mr. Vesey. Okay. Mr. Waltz, and then we'll do Mr. Vesey. Go ahead, Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and since many of Chairman Milley's comments that day were directed at me, I want to correct a few things for the record. Number one, again, as we've stated, but I think is well worth repeating, I think everyone who supports this amendment is absolutely in favor of a very honest and very realistic teaching of our history, and that our history in this country with race has been abhorrent. But, Mr. Chairman, I take umbrance with the notion that we are seeking to stop our military from dealing with racism or our history with racism. We are looking to stop what we believe and what so many have brought to us believe is indoctrination, that America and our military is fundamentally racist today, not its history that so many have eloquently cited, today. Mr. Milley addressed his comments to me. He was responding to what I held up is a seminar that was taught to over 100 cadets, one of which could be our future chairman of the Joint Chiefs, on how to deal with whiteness and your white rage, taught by a woman who teaches that today the Republican Party is fundamentally racist, that is a platform of white racism, and that white people, all white people, rage stems from the advancement of black people, not 100 years ago, not 40 years ago, today. And that's why this is indoctrination, and that's why this is something that we seek to halt, and that is inappropriate to be taught to our future military leaders. It's activism, it's political, and it's inappropriate in an apolitical military. We cannot fight racism with more racism. And to my colleague, I want to be very clear. I wasn't even aware of these teachings. That seminar and others was brought to me by cadets, by soldiers, by families, actually citing other courses that we don't have time to get into today. One came home to their family and said they were embarrassed to be white, embarrassed to be a Republican, and embarrassed of their family. Another came home and questioned whether they wanted to remain in the military to defend a fundamentally racist country. Mr. Chairman, to say, I understand you're saying this is not happening in our force, but I'm going to respond to so many soldiers and families who say it is, and that it's dividing our military, hurting unit cohesion, and hurting morale. And this is something that I think is absolutely appropriate for this committee to address. I yield my time. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Mr. Vesey, Ms. Bice, and Ms. Jacobs, and I would love it if we could call it right there. Ms. Bice is saying no. Okay. Mr. Vesey?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. We've talked a lot about racism and how it's structured throughout things in the past, but I want to talk about something recent that was very disturbing. A few years ago, and they were kids from the Dallas area. They were students at OU. And there was a song that they created to, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. And basically it was, there will never be a NSAE. There will never be a NSAE. You can hang one from a tree, but one will never join with me. There will never be a NSAE. And of course, the knee-jerk reaction to that was, oh, that's just that chapter. Those are just some kids in that chapter that were on that bus singing the song with a black bus driver that was taking them to see a black concert, a black performer at a concert. And they were like, oh, no, it's an isolated incident. Thank God that there were people that were a part of that chapter that said, no, I went to, this school in the South in 1978 and we sang the song. And then other people were like, no, we sang the song. It comes out that not only did they sing the song, but throughout that, about 6 or 7 fraternities and sororities have very segregationist, anti-interracial relationship stances, token people that they pledge, different things like that. That is really structured within that fraternal and sorority order that they have. And again, this was a few years ago, wasn't a long time ago. And some of these kids are going into the business world. They're going into the military to be officers. Some of them probably are now. And if we have a chance to impress up on young people how that sort of structure is built into the way that they think, and we can change them for the better, we ought to. Representative Spear put together an amazing trip to Fort Hood back in March or April. And I'm going to take off my black hat for a second and just put on my male hat. Listening to a female soldier talk to us off the record about how she was going to figure out how she was going to stay in the military because she had a baby and the guy that she had the baby with, who was also in the military, left her. And, they change her shift and she has to figure out how she's going to get daycare. And I thought to myself, I said, structurally, this system is built for that guy that moved to another state, for him to stay in the military and for him to continue on and have a military career. But for her, she's probably going to have to leave. She'll probably end up getting discharged because her being a single mom doesn't fit within the mission of the Army and the way that it's structured. And so learning how we can fix things like that when things are structured against people, whether it's race or whether it is...
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
So we're pretty close to wrap up here. Ms. Jacobs, do you have something incredibly compelling to close us out here?
I just want to make one quick point that
Sure.
This is not just about equity and wokeness. It's actually also about the effectiveness of our military forces. We know that when we send them to foreign countries, them being able to understand the systems and cultures that they're operating in are incredibly important. I would venture to say that part of our failure in Afghanistan was due to our superficial understanding of their society and culture. And we need to be training our military and civilian leaders to understand these systems and biases and recognize their own blind spots and think differently so that we don't make these mistakes moving forward. I yield back.
Thank you. All right. The question occurs in the amendment by Mr. Green. Yes. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair.